what I would like to do now is introduce our first presenter, Dr. Russ Bazukel. So you can read on the program kind of the nitty-gritty on Russ, and he'll probably talk with you about that too. But on a more personal note, I call Russ my friend. I love you, Russ.
Love you.
Russ traveled here from the Omaha area. Very special to have presenters who support you, support us. And he comes because of the audience. He says every time he presents, the audience is engaging and kind. And so I welcome Russ.
Thank you, Judy. Let's see. All right, just wanted to make sure I knew how to adjust the slides there. All right, good morning, AAPT. Hopefully my mouth doesn't work like that all day. Good morning. All right, well, thanks for having me here again today. Over the past 7 years, I've presented 5 times. So again, like Judy said, I'm always amazed at this group, how engaged you are, critical thinking, and the questions that you ask. Unfortunately, today, I probably have about 8 hours worth of material squeezed into about an hour. So here are the objectives. We're going to talk a little bit about the history of LGBTQ+. We're going to talk about some terms and definitions. We're also going to talk about a few areas where maybe you can improve your practice as a pharmacy tech. So the reason why I do that is because some of you might be part of the LGBTQ+ community, and that's great. Today I'm going to give you some examples, maybe some lived examples, some material that I've encountered. We're going to hit on a whole smattering of topics across the LGBTQ arena and spectrum. So just hang with me, just look at it from a different perspective. You may have more knowledge than I do, and that's great. I'm just going to present you with a different lens. Some of you, when I present these classes, these sessions, have never had a session like this before. It's brand new material. So that's why I try to cram 8 hours into an hour, and I'll get through it as fast as I can, but please know it'll be very rapid fire. And also, we're going to hit on a whole bunch of topics. You can look, I'm no longer young. I'm in my 50s, but I can talk about youth issues. Also working in a pediatric facility, I have a little bit of experience there. We've already seen the main objectives, and these are kind of some of the informal objectives. And the reason why I put these up here is to let you know it's going to be an informal session. It's going to be heavily dependent on lived experiences. I'm a PhD by trade. I could stand up here, present you with stats, and have you asleep in 5 minutes. That's one of my superpowers. All right. But what I find, though, when talking with people is that hearing about the lived experience or just talking about the topics, sexual orientation, gender identity, they're kind of taboos in a way in this country, along with mental health issues. So once in a while, you'll see where people are disenfranchised, marginalized, and we could be talking about the LGBTQ+ community, or we could be talking about people of color, different religions, different national origins. So you're going to see some common threads that reach across the entire spectrum of diversity and inclusivity. What I saw on the agenda, and I think this is going to work out very nicely, and I'm sure Judy did it by design, is today is going to be a lot more example-driven with a little bit of action items at the end. Tomorrow you have a working lunch, which sounds like a lot more action towards inclusivity. So I think that's going to make for a nice bookend presentation for you today versus tomorrow's lunch and learn. So hang in there with us. Judy, any idea how to bring up the slides on here? All I'm seeing is up on here. So, sorry. So I'll keep talking through this. I'll go off the slides up here. So if you're wondering, the presentation today is not going to make you gay for a day or queer for a year. That's not possible. That's not my superpower. Putting you to sleep really could be. I'm just not seeing. If you could help me out there, that'd be great. But again, while we're getting that fixed, is the idea today, I'm presenting you with one perspective on a very diverse topic. So thank you. Appreciate that.
I'm not going to leave until it's back.
Okay.
Make sure it's back up here.
Thanks for your help. All right, I'm going to sing and dance here in a second. Oh, there we go. Okay, good. All right. Thank you. Thanks for the help. All right, so moving on. So quick quiz. Yeah, I'm a teacher. I'm an educator. Quiz, pop quiz. Who on the screen up here? LGBT. Yes? No? What do you think? Who? Anybody on it? Anyone? No one? Yeah, we don't know. That's the point of this slide here, folks. When you're working with your clients, your customers, your patients, we don't know. Unfortunately, a lot of times in this country, we have stereotypes that are associated. People see the ladies on motorcycles. Trust me, I've heard it before. Oh, must all be lesbians. Not true. You don't know. You're not going to know that with your patients, your family, your coworkers. Same thing with the military. There's LGBTQ plus people in the military. Right here, folks, 20 years. When you're looking at the construction workers, people make bad assumptions about construction workers and also about people in the hairstyling industry. So what I'm here to say today is avoid the stereotypes. We're going to talk about some generalizations today, and we're just going to try to normalize some of the conversations for you, not make you afraid of talking about these topics. I can tell you yesterday we went out to Durham, my husband and I. We went out there, we were trying to find some restaurants. We got caught in a rainstorm. Nice gentleman came along, he tried to help us out. He took us through one of the buildings, said, hey, we'll get you over here, you won't have to walk through the rain. Very nice gentleman, no issues, we're talking. So at the end, we're getting ready to leave. He said, well, how are you guys related? What's your father's son, brothers, cousins? I said, no, we're married. So he's my husband. You could tell, unfortunately, he got very nervous at that point. He's like, oh, hi. Well, hey, that's great. Yeah. Oh, good for you. What I'm here today, folks, is to talk about these topics, make it more normalized for all of you, make it easier for you. Some of you might be very comfortable with it right now. Some of you might not be. So that's kind of the idea. So here are the stereotypes, kind of running down through them. People make them. I've heard all of these, that everybody who's LGBTQ+, they're an atheist. No, it's not true. Some of the most religious people I know are part of the community. Unfortunately, I grew up in a community that the high school was all white, all Christian. Nothing wrong with that, nothing wrong with those two topics, but there was no diversity whatsoever, and everything I grew up hearing was very negative about LGBTQ+, very negative about anybody who was different than them. So, what I'm here to say today is I'm not here to look for anybody to feel sorry for me, not looking for anybody to say that I'm great. I left my narcissistic presentation at home. What this is to show you that people, while they're often told they may not amount to anything, I think I'm okay. I'm kind of like middle of the road. Again, not looking for any congratulations or anything, but when you grow up, when you're LGBTQ youth or anybody who's in those disenfranchised, marginalized groups who keep hearing negative things, that weighs on you. But you can pretty much grow up to be whatever you want. So this is kind of to show you that my family is what I consider normal. So there's Dan and myself. That's my husband. Last year at Yellowstone, we like being in the outdoors. That's great. We took my mom to Chicago a few years ago. We're up in the old Sears Tower. I guess it's the Willis Tower. It might be something else now. She had difficulty in that glass box. She didn't like being 90-some stories up. She was like, ah! But yeah, we're just what I think as a normal family. I have my Air Force family after 20 years. And also, I do stupid things. So that's me up a tree with a running chainsaw. I mean, yeah, that's pretty dumb. So I'll take credit for that one. I'll own that one. But I just wanted to show you a little bit of who we are there. All right, I told you we talk about some terms. Sometimes this gets very confusing for everybody. The terms are out there. But when you talk about LGBTQ+, it all kind of boils down to SOGI, sexual orientation, gender identity. Breaking that down, sexual orientation, that's who you're attracted to. I'm a man attracted to other men, you know. Some of you might be the same way. Some of you might be different. Things like that. So think about it, sexual orientation, who are you attracted to? Gender identity is who do you identify yourself as. I was born a male. I identify as a male. Cisgender male, male. Some people you'll find are born, they don't identify with the physical body that they were born into. That's our trans community. So for them, it's a long path forward. I cannot speak to that directly, but I've heard some of the speakers talk, and again, they fall into a lot of the coming out process that the rest of us do with the LGBTQ+ community. I can't even imagine what it would be like to be born into the body you don't identify with. So along those lines, we're finding that gender is no longer strictly binary. On the forms for your pharmacy, Start considering not just male, female. X is another one, or other are acceptable categories. Ask somebody from the LGBTQ plus community to look at your forms, because if the first thing people do is sit down and fill out a form and they don't see a group that they belong to, it gets very confusing, and you start to close in. You start to not feel welcome at the pharmacy or the medical facility. Transphobia, homophobia, you get the idea. It's people afraid of something. And when they're afraid of it, they often lash out at it. So homophobia is people who are against or have fear of homosexuality. Trans, same thing with the trans community. Internalized homophobia, I don't know if this is a true diagnosis, but we have seen it. My husband and I have witnessed it, is people who we know are a part of or identify on the LGBTQ plus spectrum, but don't want to admit it. They're kind of angry at themselves. I've gone through that with myself over history, where I wasn't happy with who I was. I didn't want to identify with being a gay male. So they kind of internalize that and become unhappy with themselves. Covering is kind of the new term nowadays for being in the closet. Covering means not living your authentic life. Basically, I did that through my 20 years in the military, where I would have gotten kicked out if I would have identified as being a gay male. So people cover. It's what people used to know as being in the closet. You don't live your authentic life, who you are. So the new term kind of is covering. I like that a little bit better because, really I never lived in a closet, but I did cover. I did pretend to be straight, even though I knew who I was. And you'll find that a lot. Here are the terms, LGBTQ+. Not trying to disenfranchise or marginalize anybody here. There are more letters. You can Google them, but these are kind of the basic core terms that you'll hear out there. From the trans community, please do not use the word transgendered. It seems like it's something that's been done to them. That's the way it's been described to me. And if you see something on my slides that's in red, foot stomp, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, you may see it on the quiz at the end. So we have to provide questions. I'm sure the advisory committee is going to slap me one of these days and stop me from doing this. But if you see it in red up here, you may see it again. So don't use the term transgendered, please. Allies are huge to us. They're the people who help advance the causes. It's people like Judy and the advisory team who ask us to speak at conventions like this about this topic, to help normalize the conversation, to help educate you on the topics. All right, coming out process. So let me kind of start with the end of this slide. So thinking about coming out, that means somebody stands up and says, hey, this is who I am. A lot of times that comes with fear of repercussions. So if you want to think about it, if you want to put yourself in the person's shoes, the coming out process, think about a secret. Just sit there for a moment. Think about a secret that only you know about yourself. Once you think of it, think of yourself coming up here on the stage and telling everybody about it. Think about how that might feel. You may not want to know how other people are going to react to you. You may not ever let that secret out. So that's really what the coming out process is like. Typically, it's difficult. Some people may never, ever come out. If you look at Maslow's hierarchy up there, I put two of them up there for a reason. The first one, and I'd love to do a study on this sometime. I'm sure there's some levels of study, but we find that with LGBT youth, they either won't come out because they're afraid they're going to be put out by their families. Some have great experiences. Some tell their families at 4 or 5 years old who they are, what gender they identify with, or maybe their sexual orientation, what they believe it to be at that time. Great. That's wonderful when the families are accepting, but a lot of times they're not. We see a lot of homeless youth. They're homeless because they've been put out by their families. They're no longer allowed or accepted by their families. So, in my opinion, Maslow's hierarchy gives a great basis. For myself, I didn't come out until after I left the military because I knew I had a pension, so I had money coming in. I also knew that I had health insurance. Those are huge, lower-level Maslow's hierarchy that I knew I could meet. Even if you all rejected me, even if my family rejected me, I'd be okay. So people look at it in that way. They may not do that whole analytical process. So I think I was about self-esteem level when I came out. That's where I was. We're also going to find that people, when they come out, some revert a little bit, depending on how people react to them. And that fact is if I've seen some faculty members who lived in Lincoln, Nebraska, moved to Omaha, Nebraska. They're like, I was out in Lincoln. They told me this specifically. I felt comfortable. I could be out. I could be myself. But when I moved to Lincoln, the group I was around and working with, I did not feel accepted by. So that person basically went back into the closet or started covering again. So you can see where possibly your level on Maslow's hierarchy could change after coming out. So my case, I think for me, I probably went from self-esteem up to maybe even self-actualization for a while because I was finally living. Okay, somebody called the police on me, or? Okay. All right, I didn't think I was that bad so far. All right, but that's kind of the coming out process. People don't understand that, so I thought I'd bring that up and talk about it a little bit. Fenway Institute, it's a great resource for you as far as if you want to look up LGBTQ health and how to deal with it as a provider, as a clinician, being in the medical field, being a pharmacy tech. So feel free to look at them, and I'll talk about them some more later. But they had a great example in some of the literature that they gave. It had a 70-year-old lesbian and the things that she saw. So think about this for diversity, not just LGBTQ+, but all of diversity and inclusivity. What shoes have those people walked in? What have they seen? What's brought them to this point? So I can use my own example again, not trying to make it truly all about me, but it's what I can speak to and not have to get into a copyright infringement. But Stonewall, if you don't know what that was, it was basically 1969. They mark it as the beginning of the civil rights movement for LGBTQ+. It was a bar in New York City that was basically seen as a gay bar. The police would come in periodically, harass the patrons, and at one point they fought back. So that's where the Stonewall riots came from, 1969. I was born early 1970. Up till 1973, homosexuality was designated by the APA as a mental disorder. So think about it, folks. When people change things, do they change right away? Do they change that day? No. Mentalities, traditions, things carry on for years or decades. So here I am. I go through high school. I mentioned all white, no diversity in the school system there whatsoever. Joined the Air Force at age 17. It was illegal. It was absolutely illegal to be gay. I could have went to jail if I would have admitted to it. Luckily, I didn't lie on my forms. I didn't know who I was at the time, didn't identify, didn't do anything that would make me compromise my answer. But that kind of stigma's there. You feel that pressure because now governmental forces are now pretty much identifying this as a bad thing and saying you could go to jail if this is you. So anyway, kind of continuing down the timeline, the example here is just to show that people see different things during their lives, no matter what group they belong to, as a part of diversity and inclusivity. All right? So just kind of keep that in mind when you're working with your families and your patients. Me personally, I didn't admit until I was dating Dan for about 2 years that I was gay. Again, that was me. People have different trajectories, different paths that they take. But I found that I first had to identify to myself who I was and accept it before I could tell other people about it. You know, now I look back on it, it's like a duh moment for me, but when you're living it at the time, it's something different. So, moving on, we saw the military, don't ask, don't tell. You could be gay, but if you admit it to somebody, you got kicked out. I could have lost my career at 16 and a half years if I would have admitted who I was. By that time, I was dating Dan, so we had to be in hiding. In 2002, we just celebrated our 20th anniversary. We admitted to ourselves who we were, and we gave each other silver rings to mark our wedding. But we couldn't legally get married at that time. And every time we came back to Omaha, we had to take our rings off. A little bit different now. We do have legal marriage. You can see right here, 2013, we got married. So that's a good thing for us. We didn't harm anybody in doing it. It's just now we got the legal protections that other people have, that they were afforded their entire lives. Continuing on, you can just see how it progresses. Things change over time. Things are getting better, but we're going to talk about that a little bit more later. Here are some of those issues, people walking in other people's shoes. Military, there was a lot of abuse of LGBTQ plus community while I was in. So again, it makes you feel like you don't want to come out, and that may be how some of your patients and family and coworkers are feeling. So kind of keep that in mind. Now a little bit more fun slide. Without looking at the credits, lower left side, black and white. Who is that? Does anybody know? Leave it to Beaver. Okay, thank you. Yes, thank you. This group, at least somebody knew. I don't know how many times I put that slide up and it's crickets. I'm like, oh, God, I'm old. Yeah. So anyway, leave it to Beaver. So that's great. Were there LGBTQ plus people back then? Was there diversity back then? Yep. But this was kind of the example that was put on TV in the 50s. Dad worked. He came home in a suit. I don't know about you, but I don't recall looking through a photo album with my family in suits. There's Mom in pearls, and she used to mop in her pearls. And high heels, yeah, thank you. Yeah. How many had a family like that? No, but that's what we represented on television at the time. Now, television's a dual-edged sword. In the 90s, we started to see where the LGBTQ plus community was seen not as the negative part of a joke. Things started getting a little bit better. I don't know about you, but the Modern Family up there, the Modern Family episodes, that's more of my family, I can pretty much tell you. Things are on fire and things are going crazy all the time. The other part, the media. The media, again, is a dual-edged sword. Sometimes it's nice. They'll talk about things and bring these conversations to the forefront, and we can talk about them. Unfortunately, the media likes to sensationalize things, too, if you didn't know that. Dan and I were in Washington, D.C. in about 2016 for a conference similar to this. I was a participant. I was sitting in the audience, and the D.C. Pride Parade was going on. That's wonderful. That's great. I never thought I would see in my life that the military Joint Service Color Guard would lead off the Washington Pride Parade. That was super cool to me. The embassies sent people, businesses sent people, everything like that. I was super impressed. And it went on for 3 hours. It was a 3-hour-long parade. Super impressed. Not saying anything wrong about this situation at all. Please take that in the context. But we saw a gentleman come down, and you're going to see everybody at a pride parade. Gentleman was wearing these big pink flowered wings, kind of nothing more than like a pink jock strap and like a harness type thing. Nothing illegal. I'm not knocking it. I'm not saying anything negative about that. He wasn't doing anything illegal. But I pointed to Dan. I said, hey, I bet tonight on the news, if they're going to cover the event, that's who's going to be on. I swear on a stack of Bibles, on all things religious, that's who the news picked up on. So that's the image that the news presents of the LGBTQ plus community. Nothing wrong with that. I am not knocking that in any way. But this is also the community too, folks. There may be some of you out in the audience today, and that's great. But you see what I'm saying is that the media will try to sensationalize things and present one end of the spectrum or not. All right, so families. Let's talk about these. We talked about them a little bit. You see something in red up there? You may see that question again. Are families always supportive of the community? No. Families are always changing. In your practice, what you're going to see in your clinics is you're going to see people. You're going to see man, woman, children. Okay, cool. You may see man, children. You got all the examples up there. So just be ready for it, folks. When they come in and meet with you, just treat them like you would anybody else. You should treat everybody equally when they come into your pharmacy. All right? That's all I ask of you. Does that make sense? Okay, got some head nods there. Great. You're also going to find, too, I know a lot of folks who got married because they felt that they were pressured to do so. My own husband was married and has 2 kids. Unfortunately, they're estranged right now. They kind of went away, want nothing to do with Dan now, unfortunately. I know other people who are in the same situation. The families are very blended. They go on vacations together. The kids are part of the 2 dads' lives now and things like that. So you're going to see a little bit of everything in your practice, folks. Just be ready for it and treat it like you would anybody else. All right? And what we see there is traditionally in the past, a lot of times the community, if they're disenfranchised, they're marginalized, they're going to identify with their friends a little bit more. So when you're coming out, we often see that people come out to their closest friends first. They're probably the people who already know who you are. So they're going to come out to them first. They'll start extending to the family members that they trust next, and then to the wider family, and then to the public. That's basically the process I went through. My coming out process was about 3 years long. Dan, my husband, he wasn't coming out. I'm like, hey, Dan, I said, our circles are going to interact here soon. Somebody's going to find out, I'm out, you're not, and we live together. So I said, you might want to do something. So I kept nudging on him to do something. Well, my husband, he goes big or stays home. He finished 40 years at the University of Nebraska Medical Center. They did a little kind of a newsletter on him. Cool, that's great. Well, one of the questions was, 40 years ago, how has it changed here at UNMC? My husband went and said, well, I started out with a wife and 2 kids. I ended with a husband and 2 dogs. I'm like, I didn't know this was coming either. So I'm like, wow, that was different. Way to hire a publicist and go for it, Dan. But it proves to you that the coming out process is different for everybody. Some may never do it. I took about 3 years. Dan went, boom, let's just make it all happen today. So anyway, that's something to think about. But families are not always supportive just because somebody comes out. All right, let's talk about youth issues for a little bit here, folks. So according to Fenway, if you look at all these, I'm not going to read all of them to you, but when you talk about various issues, do LGBTQ plus youth feel safe? Do they feel like they have adequate health care? Do they feel like they can trust their providers? Do we have negative outcomes? According to Fenway Institute, that red comment says that basically the outcomes are almost always double towards the negative when you're talking about LGBTQ youth versus non-LGBTQ youth. Everybody kind of understand that? So if you look at the numbers and all the studies I've looked at over the years, they're almost double in the negative direction. Now, I just saw a documentary not too long ago that was actually leaning towards 4 times. So kind of keep that in mind. Kind of rolls into the next slide. Why are youth having issues? Again, a couple red comments up here. Lack of proper role models. I didn't have any when I was growing up. Nobody I could identify in my local community. We grew up in the mountains of Appalachia in Pennsylvania. I didn't see anybody who looked like me, acted like me, had feelings like I did at that time. So couldn't identify. Lack of trust in adult figures. The underlying sentence there, the reason why I have that one on there, is I often hear from the older LGBTQ plus community. And they're right. They're like, oh, we went through Stonewall. We went through the situation with the AIDS pandemic, and we were blamed for everything. It was called gay pneumonia. It was called gay cancer. A lot of negative press on that. So they'll often stand up and they're like, well, we paved the way, and we did. Yes, they did. You're right. And because of a lot of the places where we are today was because of those situations. Okay. The attitude is kind of like, well, the youth should be thankful. Well, the problem has just changed, in my opinion. Social media is one of the worst things, in my opinion, when it comes to these types of topics. I'm getting a big head nod in the back there. Thank you. So the reason why I say that is, when I was a kid, if you were bullied, no matter what, we had a single landline in our house. Once you got to your house, you were in your house. Nobody could pick on you at that point. Social media nowadays, if you have a trans youth member, somebody who's identifying as bi or queer, well, they can reach out and touch you like 24/7 from across the world nowadays. So the issue's changed, folks. It's just different nowadays. I can talk to you today because things have changed. But social media is not always the best thing. So kind of keep that in mind. And then watch that with your kids too. Is kind of monitor their situation, see if they're being bullied. We've seen people bullied into suicidal situations. That's something we don't want anymore, folks. We don't need that. All right, so along those same lines, 42% of the LGBTQ youth, including half of the transgendered or non-binary, seriously considered attempting suicide in the past year. Those are horrible numbers, folks. I don't want to see that with any kid. But, the one point that was made by the source was that even one person can make a difference in a child's life. LGBTQ plus, marginalized, disenfranchised, whatever you want to call it, be that person that they can talk to. Give them a smile. Be a positive attitude for them. You can make a difference. You can stop a suicide, potentially. If you take nothing else away from my presentation today, please do this. Just be nice to one another. You're a great group right here. Like I said, Judy said, I love coming back to this group every year because of the energy, the critical thinking. What you're doing is trying to advance yourself and your profession. But there's a lot of people out there who don't. So if you can be that one person for that child that they can talk to, they can see you as a positive role model. They know they can trust you. You're a shoulder they can lean on. Huge difference, folks, okay? So please, that's my one takeaway, if you would. You can be that one person that helps. It's right there. All right, differences. This is about regional differences. So we're kind of skipping to another topic. People often think the coasts are very much more progressive. In most cases they are, but there are still pockets where they're not. Everybody thinks the Midwest is not progressive. We have pockets where we are, we have pockets where we aren't. I remember when we first started our group at UNMC, one of the Pride Alliance groups there, we were talking with one of the students, and I said, hey, where are you from? He's like, oh, Grand Island. It's a super small town out in western Nebraska. I said, oh, you're here to be more open and accepting? He was like, oh, no. My family was great. They were open and accepting. That was wonderful. Good. The family was very well-to-do in the town, and everybody knew them and respected them, so they had good experiences. Great. Okay, that's good. That was me. I had a bad bias or a bad thought in that direction, bad stereotype in my head. We all make mistakes, folks. But I met another person, similar situation. He's like, oh, no, I had to get out of that small town because everybody was in your business. Everybody knew it, and they didn't like me and what I was doing. So they came to Omaha to be more progressive, more accepted. So kind of answer my own question there. And Dan comes from Omaha. I come from East Central Pennsylvania. I already mentioned that and talked about that a few times. So I'm not going to spend too much on this area. One thing to think about, though, the last bullet on the slide there, international patients you might have. They may come from an area where homosexuality is met with physical abuse or prison or death currently. So when you're dealing with international patients, please take that into consideration too. They may be more guarded, is what we often see. May not be as accepted as every other patient that you might have. So just kind of take that into consideration too, where the people come from. All right, so here comes one. I'm going to inject something different here from where the slides were handed in. Are things always on a positive trajectory as far as the LGBTQ movement? Not always. You're correct. Overall, we have a positive incline going on, but the reason why I put no here, and it wasn't just because of the event I'm going to talk about, these are the events I normally put in the slide, up and down, kind of positives and negatives, things like that. And even if it looks positive and I have a negative, sometimes I look at it and go, well, why is it 2022 and we're still fighting this issue? Why isn't it just normal situation related to diversity and inclusion? So this slide's fine. The one thing that did happen that I want to bring up, it's not on the slides, is from the time we handed in these slides until today. And part of the reason why I get up in the morning sometimes and I go, okay, things are getting better. Maybe we don't need to have these talks anymore. It's great that Judy asked me to come here, or maybe it's great that we have an employee resource group at Children's. But, we need this. Things are getting better. It's looking good, somewhat. Still some issues. Well, as of about 2 months ago, our hospital in Omaha, Children's Hospital, sponsored the local Pride events. We did it last year. Last year was great. People were like, yay, Children's, we're glad you're here, support the kids, yay, everything was good. This year we do about the same thing. Unfortunately, we were met with a lot of negative comments. We were called pedophiles. We were called groomers. Physical violence was threatened against us if we showed up at the Youth Pride events Friday night in Omaha. Kind of made me think, yeah, we still need to have these conversations. We still need to have these types of classes. Eventually, FBI was involved, Omaha police, because people started floating the term Pizzagate. I didn't even know what that was. But that was supposedly where somebody went into a pizzeria, accused the pizzeria of grooming and being pedophiles, and shot the place up. So basically, somebody was threatening to shoot up our support of Youth Pride this year. So we had a lot more police involvement. There was security. We did not participate in the Youth Pride event because of that. I feel horrible about that. The kids need support. They need to know that there's healthcare providers out there that want to support them. But because there was such threat of violence, we didn't go. We did go to the parade the next day, the adult parade, the adult festival. We had a great time. We were met with love, a lot of support, and the protesters were kind of corralled. We normally see protesters at those events, but due to the threats and everything that happened. So my point there is, folks, it's still going on today, and these topics and these talks are still relevant. Everybody understand where I'm coming from on that? Sorry to be like a Debbie Downer, but it just happened like in the last month. Literally, it was last weekend we had the Pride event, and I was hoping that our team didn't get shot up there. So, all right, aging and older. I kind of fall into this category. So a little bit older generation. We talked a little bit earlier about prices, differences. All right. So there are generational differences. And what you're going to see, I talked about the one where, my generation feels like they've gone through a lot, but then the younger generation has the social media bullying to deal with. Some people may say, oh, you're older and gay. You have everything going for you. Okay. Some do, some don't. We're just part of society like everybody else, folks. We're a microcosm. You're going to see people who are wealthy and some who are not. Probably no different than the folks that you deal with in your own family. So, kind of watching time here. This is an obituary from one of our friends, 2021, so January 2021. This is kind of new to the slide deck. Older couple, 2 gentlemen were married. One passed away. He was like about 84. He passed away about 7 years ago. His husband lived on until January, and I removed the names to de-identify this. But take a look at that obituary. What's wrong with that? Can you say that a little louder? Okay. Yeah, it doesn't mention, you're right. What she said is the preceded in death. If you look at that, this gentleman was married at one time. He was preceded in death by his husband and actually a wife too, much earlier, but not mentioned. It shows that this person was not accepted by his family, because typically the obituaries are done by the family and the funeral home, things like that. Dan and I saw this. We were literally ticked off because, ironically, of the 2 gentlemen, and I told you some people never come out, the first gentleman who died earlier never really came out to his family. He never put the words to it. This person here, he came out. His family knew about him. He knew that they were married. The gentleman built 4 houses together over 40 years of being together. But yet there's no respect. There's no mention. So think about that, people. These types of things are the impact items that other people see. All right? So generational effects, we talked about that. The whole idea of covering leading to unhealthy life. The longer you cover, the longer the unhealthy situation. One big concern of the older LGBTQ plus community is who's going to take care of them when they get older. My type of situation, I don't have any kids. If Dan goes before me, if I need long-term care, or who's going to bury me? That's often the situation. Not much I can do about it. I'm not going to worry about it personally too much, but I do have to take it into consideration. But you're going to find that's a major concern of a lot of your older LGBTQ plus folks right now, is who's going to take care of them and be a provider for them. All right, we're running a little short on time. If you get a chance, look at this video. I think this is a great video as far as it's from The Greatest Showman. It's Keala Settle. I'm getting a little head nod here. I think you know which one it is. It's a song called This Is Me. In no way am I trying to equate the LGBTQ community to P.T. Barnum's sideshow. It's just the point that we're all different, folks. That's the biggest takeaway there. But if you look at it and you hear the song and watch the words, it talks about living in the dark. Words can cut like knives. That's the big thing to think about when you're in your practice and you're in your pharmacy. You can see the way the verbiage kind of steps through. People are telling you that you're broken parts. Then eventually they start kind of coming out with that middle section there, and then at the end they're accepted. At first there's some resistance in the middle. But anyway, watch the video if you get a chance. I'm not going to play it today just because we are running a little short on time. But it's a wonderful graphical representation of music video if you ever get to see it. So, a lot of Debbie Downer stuff here today, folks, but I really want to make a few points for you, how we need your support. We need you to be the greatest pharmacy tech you can be. And this is me now. I'm one of the lucky ones. I'm happy. Dan and I are proud. That's us probably about 7 years ago at one of the local pride parades in Omaha before we actually started sponsoring it. And now I'm living my authentic life and I'm much happier. But that may not be everybody's case. So please keep that in mind with your patients. Everyone's unique. They all have their own story, whether you're LGBT or not. So this is one of the areas I really want to get to, so kind of the reason why I speed it through. But these are areas where possibly you can help to improve. So folks, I don't care, LGBTQ, people of color, people of different religions, people from different backgrounds, just show respect for all. That's all we're asking, and I'm sure you're going to. This group I'm not worried about. I'm happy with this group. I think you're going to do it. It's not going to be an issue, but you'd be surprised. Professionalism, communication, empathy, think about those. That's why you're here, why you're advancing yourselves in your careers. Use of proper pronouns. Some of your Epic systems, your Cerner, your different systems, I'm not sure what everybody's using in all their pharmacies, but there are places where you can list your proper pronouns or go by name. If a patient wants to be called by a different name, I don't see a problem with that. It's going to do no harm to you, and I'm sure you're going to be supportive. I'm not worried about this group, but we actually see people who are very resistant. If they're listed as Bob Smith on their legal records, but they want to go by Stephanie, they absolutely refuse to do it. I'm not sure why. You know, if it makes the person more comfortable as your patient. Watch for terms like partner. Frequently, I told you the example of being out in Durham yesterday. They thought Dan was my brother, dad, cousin. People often come in the room, or I'll get phone calls. Hey, is the wife of the house there? The woman of the house? No, two guys. We're good. But, you know, watch for that when you meet a patient for the first time. Sometimes if they present, two people present, let's say you're at a retail pharmacy. You're not sure who's with them. Just ask them, well, who's with you here today? You know, who's with you here today? Something like that. That's probably one of the best ways to keep yourself out of trouble. Don't automatically assume, oh, this is your sister, when two people, same sex, might be married. So just watch that. Proper pronouns, go by names. Don't make an assumption. One thing I talk to our medical students and our PA students specifically about is sometimes people, and this may apply to you because we're talking about hormone therapies, is we've seen where people are like, oh, well, I see that you're identifying as a trans male and you're taking these hormone therapies. Why are you doing this? So what I try to talk to the providers about, if the person came in for a chief complaint of an earache and you're asking about their gender reassignment surgery, they may not equate that. They may see that as an issue. However, as providers, sometimes they want to know, are we having interactions with hormones, with the prescribed medicines? So there's a legitimate reason for it, but just think about it, people. If you're guarded, you're already kind of on edge and not sure if you're going to be accepted or not, that little explanation as to why you're asking those types of questions help. Did that make sense where I was going with that? Because we actually saw that complaint when I worked at UNMC, the emergency department. Somebody wrote up that the triage nurse seemed more concerned about their transition surgery than about the primary care. They came in for like a sore throat or something. I can't go back and trace it and say, you know, was it a legitimate concern or was it somebody just being overly curious? So again, explain why you're asking those types of questions if they're relevant, because people may not put two and two together. Dan and I had a similar situation. How are we doing on time? Dan and I had a similar situation. At first, when we went to our clinics, he went to a family med clinic, I went to an internal med clinic that were basically across the street. We were friends, roommates, whatever you want to call it, for the longest time. And then eventually, when we came out, we said, okay, Dan's my husband. We moved to the same clinic. The next time we got sick, we went in. Dan went in. I got sick like 2 weeks later. We got like every test in the world, HIV, syphilis, gonorrhea. And my understanding of that is because we're considered what's a high-risk lifestyle, even though we're definitely not high risk. But there's people out there much more high risk than we are in the non-LGBT community and the LGBT community. But anyway, there's algorithms out there, like if you are in a high risk, after 10 years, you have to get tested for this, you have to get tested for that. And we weren't, because we never identified prior to that. We kind of understood what was going on because we both work in a healthcare world. But I just look at it from the patient's point of view, like why or what would they think if now they went in and said, hey, you know, I got a cough, I got the flu symptoms, but now you're giving me HIV, syphilis, gonorrhea tests. I mean, now I feel like Slutzilla. You know, I mean, that's what you just made me feel like in the office. So, anyhow, think about it from that perspective. Put yourself in your patient's shoes. LGBTQ plus friendly literature in the waiting rooms. Some of the symbols you're going to see here in a moment. Websites are huge, especially the younger generation. They're all about this. You know that as well as I do. But we found people take jobs at medical facilities because they know they're going to be accepted. We had people from the West Coast say, hey, I took a job at UNMC because of the fact I saw you had an ERG, a Pride resource group, and I knew I'd be accepted. Otherwise, they wouldn't have came. So have stuff in your waiting rooms, have stuff in your pharmacies, have stuff on your websites that show people of diverse backgrounds. Our hospital is doing a better job of now representing some people of color on our marketing and advertising. Some other backgrounds, better, but could be much better. One thing that they're missing is kids want to see, if they have two mommies or two daddies, it wouldn't be bad to see an occasional picture of people like them. That's the biggest thing, folks. People want to see people like them and be accepted. So, again, we can all do better in all these arenas and keep moving forward and make things better. Forms, I already mentioned, don't have them in binary, just not only male, female. Also ask about go-by names. You know, my legal name is Russell, but I go by Russ. Not much different if you ask somebody who's non-binary and they identify a different name. You know, it's not a must that I must be called Russell every time you meet me. I know plenty of people who go by their middle name. Eye contact. I find this even if I take my mom to the physician's office. People are getting pretty bad about eye contact nowadays. I'm trying to make as much eye contact here today as I can. But when you're in a very kind of intimate session like healthcare, whether you're in the pharmacy or you're in an exam room, whatever the case may be, make eye contact. Ask who else is in the room with somebody, kind of like I mentioned earlier. A few of the things I can throw out there for you. Each patient's unique. Be a role model, a safe space, or an ally. And one thing that we also see, too, is maybe your pharmacy can claim, hey, we're super inclusive. We invite everybody here. It's wonderful. No matter who you are, what background, we're all diverse. All it's going to take is one person to screw that up for your pharmacy. So everybody needs to kind of walk the walk, talk the talk, be professional. I'm not saying everybody has to be 100% LGBTQ+, but people need to be professional. They need to not make those negative comments about anybody in any of the groups, okay? Kind of get where I'm coming from on those things. Another thing where we saw write-ups in the past from patients is that exact thing. You know, Dr. So-and-so was great, access was great, but nurse so-and-so wasn't. You know, you claim to be an LGBTQ plus facility, but she didn't know about the terms, didn't know about this, he didn't know about that. Actually would not call me by my go-by name. So all it takes is one person can screw up things for a great facility. Here's some resources and symbols. I'm kind of coming to the end here. I'm almost done. People recognize these things. My lanyard at work is a rainbow-colored lanyard, and I have a little rainbow lapel ribbon that's attached to my badge. It kind of symbolizes the people that I'm open and accepting. And you'd be surprised at how many people notice that. If you have some literature in your waiting area or at your retail pharmacy, if you have a rainbow flag even, people will identify. There's a newer version out now. There are support groups out there for older LGBTQ+. That's prime timers. Just people, older guys who want to get together. Typically, that's how it is in Omaha, have coffee, go out to dinner together. There are youth groups. Queer Nebraska Youth Network, that's kind of one of our local ones back home. There's family groups out there. Sometimes family members can't accept it. My own mom still has trouble sometimes accepting who I am. You know, she tries. I definitely give her credit. She went to the parade this year, but doesn't know all the terms, doesn't understand the interaction, and that Dan and I are equal married. You know, she still may say partner or buddy or friend at times, so that kind of is a little bit different. She could use some help. She could use some support. Let's see. So we find that people in student situations, you may be training a new pharmacy tech. He or she may not want to come out to you because you're seen in a position of authority if you're the trainer, or maybe the pharmacist could be seen that way too. So a lot of times people don't want to come out for fear of repercussions. There are behavioral health resources out there, and I already mentioned for either the person who's LGBTQ+ or the family member, there's also primary and specialty care out there for everybody from your general visits to trans health, adolescent medicine, HIV, AIDS, and also as a pharmacy tech, you're not alone. Please don't think because you had this 1 hour session today, you're expected to be an expert on everything. There are resources. I'm a resource for you now. You know me now. You can reach out to me, ask me a question. I'll have my contact information here at the end. And basically along those lines too, you may make mistakes. One of the biggest things I find is people make mistakes. My recommendation is just say sorry and move on. You know, don't treat it like it's a big thing. The guy yesterday, he was very nice, but he got so nervous, he got himself spun around the axle that he thought that we were brothers. I'm okay with that. Some other people may take a little more offense. But if you make a mistake in your clinical setting, if you make a mistake in your pharmacy, we're all human, folks. So just say you're sorry and apologize and move on. I find that people, when they make too big of a deal afterwards, we're like, okay, we can move on from this now. That's one of those types of things. Biases, they go both directions. I got enough time for this one. When Dan and I finally came out, we basically, we're real old school. We still send old Christmas cards. We also send the letter that goes in it. So I know not many people do that nowadays. But we started thinking about it like, oh, we got married this year. That was back in 2013. Should we put it in there? I'm like, kind of dilemma. Should we, shouldn't I? Well, it was going out to my Air Force friends. It was going to our neighbors across the street. So we ended up putting it in there that, hey, we got married this year. Dan and I were talking. We're like, oh, my God, Gary and Deanna, they're in their 80s. They're Iowa farm people. Are they going to accept us? We don't want to lose them. They're great people. We love them. Turns out my stupidity. Again, I started out with stupidity in the beginning of this, and now I got stupidity at the end. But anyway, my stupidity, and shows that stereotypes go different directions, is we thought that we would lose them. Bad assumption on my part. Bad stereotype. They sent us a wedding card and congratulated us. This little old farm couple in their 80s. They're like, oh, we're so happy for you. We love you having you as neighbors. Well, I felt about that tall after I had those thoughts, but rightfully so. That was my fault. But everything continued on great. Folks, embrace diversity. It's what makes us stronger, okay? Go out there, people from different backgrounds, people with different experiences. Embrace it. Use it to your advantage. Too often people try to use it as a negative or as a weapon. It's a good thing, folks. All right. We have probably about 3 minutes or less for questions. This is my information. That's my email at Children's. I'm also on LinkedIn. After last year's conference, some people reached out to me there and asked a few questions. I said that people make mistakes. I hope I didn't make any mistakes or say anything that was inappropriate. I'll be out in the hallway afterwards. If you think I said anything that wasn't right, let me know. I'm human, and there's very different perspectives on this topic. We may have time for 1 or 2 quick questions. Does anybody have any questions I can help you with? Oh, looks like we got. Yeah. So the question is basically when I say about 2 times the amount of youth not having access to health care, I don't have all the specifics behind that exact stat, but a lot of times it is. They get kicked out. The families aren't backing them. They're not providing the health care. They may not be providing the health care that's specific to them. If it's a youth who's a boy identifying as a girl, they should be getting some either adolescent health, they should be getting counseling, and they're not getting that. So it makes it rougher for them as they go through. Think about it, puberty and adolescence. I don't want to go back through that again. That was not a fun, great time. But you're adding on to it where you're not getting the support. So that, I would assume, would be the answer to your question, why we see twice as many in that area, or at least approximately. All right, good question. Thank you. Any other questions? Oh, we got back there.
I just have to add this to your lecture.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why pharmacies don't change the name is because the insurances don't recognize that they don't pay.
So one of the points right there is a good point. It says a lot of times the reasons why pharmacies don't change the names is because of the insurance reason. So I agree with you on that, but the systems are getting smarter nowadays. We saw that about 10 years ago with a lot of systems that it wouldn't pay, but there's different ways now. Epic, I know, has done it. Cerner, I believe, has done it. And then, again, what type of system are you using? Is it kind of more of a homegrown, or is it pharmacy specific? Okay. So what? That's one way to go about it, is if it changes with the insurance first. The other part is, what we've seen is the legal name stays in there, however they are against the insurance, but there's often a second or third block where it can be on the chart, and it can be moved around too. So what we've done is experimented at our hospital is, it may be Sally Smith, but wants to go by John. Okay, it can be in the chart like that, but for billing purposes, it's going to take this name, but for encounter purposes, it's going to take this name. So that's an option that you can work towards with your pharmacy, I think is a great idea. The part that we have problems with as a youth facility, a pediatric facility, is maybe I'm the kid, Judy's my mom, and I want to be called Rachel instead of Russell. If the mom is not accepting, we encounter huge pushback on that. And because the mom is the legal guardian, the one who holds the insurance, that gets us into a totally different situation versus an adult facility. So you're right, but hopefully there'll be a spot where they can put, like a lot of our charts for a while, it would have the legal name here, and then actually in the bigger part up here, the go by name, so that, you know, the nurse, the access, the physician, the pharmacy would know what the person wants to be called. So just a few points there. So great question. Any others? Got literally maybe 30 seconds before Judy yanks me off the stage. Okay. All right. Anything else? Again, I thank you for being here today. Thank you for allowing me to come here. I covered a million topics at the very highest level. I'll be out in the hall. If I said anything that didn't seem right, seemed inappropriate, please let me know, because I never mean to offend anybody. And we can look at all these topics from 50 million different points of view. I just tried to give you one point of view on these today and add a couple statistics in there. So again, thank you so much. I appreciate you. Have a great conference.